All right, welcome everyone. Going to get started here in just a minute. Just wanted to wait for a few people to join in. All right, welcome everyone. Going to get started here in just a minute. Just wanted All right, let's get this show on the road. All I was paying attention to was the subject in front of me, usually a bird, and it was just all about photograph that bird, photograph that bird.
And the goal was to shoot it so that the head, the eye, the bill are all sharp, which this one is, and then I just wanted it to melt away after that.
All right, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. It's Ray here. This time it's just me. Scott and I, just to give you a heads up, our schedules have been kind of just crazy lately. Mine's been a little all over the place, and Scott's been working like crazy. So it's been really tough to get our schedules kind of linked up and going together. So, I'm doing this live video today, and I will remind you guys again at the end, but Scott is going to be doing another live stream on this Wednesday, December 19th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. He's going to be talking about predictive behavior for bird photography. So today I thought I'd do something a little bit different, and instead of having a specific topic, I just wanted to have the audience, you guys in the comments, to send some questions my way. I see my good friend Ray has actually joined in, and yeah, today in the Northeast here, it's a pretty rainy, crappy Sunday, so it should be a good day for everybody to just kind of hop on the video here and ask some questions. Anybody that's in there in the comments, feel free to ask away right now. And as soon as I see your questions, I'll actually get started and answering them. So I'm ready when you guys are. Ask away. But other than that, I also have my whole Lightroom catalog here ready to go. So any question that comes in, I can kind of show some photos and stuff like that, and talk about some things. So. I'll just wait for you guys to go ahead and ask a question. And in the meantime, while I'm waiting for some questions to roll in here, I'll let you guys know a little bit about what I've been doing lately. Right now, I'm in like kind of the final culling stages on some stuff I've shot over the past couple months. Just been kind of narrowing down a lot of different things here. And here comes the first question. So Ray asks, how can I take advantage of a rainy, crappy Sunday to shoot? How appropriate, Ray? Well, let's see. Rain can be tough, and it really depends on how rainy it is. I think it really depends on what you're trying to photograph. Songbirds can be really good in the rain, but shorebirds can be really tough, I think. They they don't look great. But let me do a quick search here for rain and see what I have here. Hey guys, thanks for saying hey, all the new people joining in. And feel free to type your questions in the comments, guys, and I will answer them as soon as I can. So here was a photo it was really light rain, so you can't actually see the rain, but you can see the raindrops on the leaves there. But the key that tends to happen when it's raining like this is you're going to be low light. So in this case, it was 200th of a second at f4 at 4000 ISO. So I was definitely pushing the ISO settings there. Here's another great rainy day. I actually went out specifically on this day because I knew it was going to be raining. And, I waited for the downpour. I had the rain gear on myself and my equipment. And again, 400th of a second at f4 ISO 1250. So actually not too bad. I didn't have to push the ISO too high on this one, but I definitely got a few shots of this owlet in the rain. And Ray sends a follow-up with that and says, can you shoot in the rain when the lighting is poor? I really think it kind of depends on your backgrounds, So having some tone, some leaves, some foliage, something like that in the background can help. Same goes with snow. Having something in the background can help. In order to show the rain and the snow, I would say what you definitely need is to have some tone in your background. So let's go. So it wasn't actually raining this day, but it was an incredibly overcast day. But even if you think about it, if it was raining and I had this really light background, the rain or even snow would pretty much be non-existent. You wouldn't be able to see it against this really light background. But as soon as you can find something with some tone like this, like the leaves in the forest in the background, the raindrops show up. So you can see the light areas here. You don't see any rain. It only shows up against the dark areas. So that's kind of key there. All right. Oh, nice. Hey, Bruce from Australia. That's awesome. All right. So let's see. I think that's enough about rain. Let's see if we have some more questions here. Connor says, I find myself spooking waterfowl often. If they fly away and I lay down, is it likely they will return to the same location and forget I was there? Great question, Connor. Waterfowl are notoriously tough to get anywhere near. When I first started photographing waterfowl, that's basically what I did. And I am lucky enough to have a pond really, really close to where I live that has hooded mergansers every year. And when I started working with them, what I was doing was actually exactly what you just said. They were at this pond all the time, and it was a relatively small pond. So I actually would walk down really slowly. They would swim completely to the other side of the pond. And then I would lay there, and sometimes it would be an hour, 2 hours, or something like that before they would completely forget that I was there and return. These photos right here were kind of taken that way. I think, let me see if I can find some that were in the evening, because that's exactly what happened. Let's see what time this was. This was an AM shoot. Now, I'd have to find some that were in the evening, but I would do just that. I would walk down, scare them away, and then wait for them to come back. Now, that was incredibly boring. And this only worked because I was on a really small pond. So what I've done in other locations that are much larger, so big rivers, really big lakes, where they can either just fly away or kind of move really far away and out of sight, is you can do the same thing, but I would recommend scouting a location multiple times. So, I would visit that same location where you expect to see some waterfowl multiple times and just see how often they're there. If you only see them one day, odds are once you scare them, they're probably going to go and find somewhere else to go. But if you see them repeatedly in the same area over and over again, especially at around the same times, if it's a tidal area, watch your tide, see if you notice more or less of them at low tide or high tide. And if they keep revisiting the same area often, and this is where putting in the time really comes in, then you can be rest assured that they're probably going to come back, even if you completely spook them and have them fly away. And I've had that. So I've had these bufflehead that I photographed recently. When I walked down to this area, they completely went, probably about a half mile out. They just completely vacated the area I was in. I actually, just full disclosure, I brought these ducks back in using decoys, but similar thing, I know they always hang out around there, so they didn't leave the area entirely, and I was able to use the decoys to bring them back in. But even without using decoys, you can definitely get away with that. All right, let's see. We got some more questions coming in. All right, let's see. So Espen asks, is there a photography concept that you think really elevated your wildlife photography when you quote unquote got it? Perspective was probably one of them. So let's see. I had a great example the other day when I was sharing one of these pied-billed grebe. I shared this the other day. So here are some pied-billed grebes from recent, and then here's one from, let's see when this one was from, 2010. All right, so let's take a look at the difference here. Perspective, okay? Same species, just on some nice water. Obviously, the light's better in my left photo there, but look at the perspective difference. On the right, I'm just standing up. I don't even remember where I was on that one. It's such a generic area. Actually, I was in Florida, so I had probably just walked by a pond, saw the bird, and I just stood there and pointed at it. For this photo, it was again in Florida, except this time I arrived at this pond because I knew this bird was there quite often. I arrived there about probably about 20 minutes before sunrise, laid down along the shoreline. I don't think I used a blind. No, I didn't use a blind, but I just laid in this one spot without moving, and I laid there for probably about 2.5 hours. And eventually this guy came swimming right along to me. So planning was a big difference. and then perspective. So I knew I wanted to get that water level perspective, and what a difference that makes compared to something like this where it's just very snapshotty, you know? So that's a great question, and that was a huge thing that really made a big difference in my photography, my wildlife photography, once I kind of got it. And usually perspective means getting on the eye level of the bird, whether that be on the ground, water level. For songbirds, just not shooting up at an angle on them. So, having warblers or any kind of songbird just shooting out kind of eye level at them, or maybe just slightly up, having some tone in the background makes a really big difference. So thanks. That was a great question. All right. Bruce asks, when you guys are pushing the ISO to 4000, are you using noise reduction in post-processing? So let's check it out. Let's look at some higher ISO stuff here. So I'm just going to bring up the filter here. This is all Lightroom, by the way. So let's go to the ISO and let's get up into some really high ISOs. Let's check. Here we go. I got a few at 8000. All right. So here's 8000 ISO on, this is my D3S, which I'm currently shooting a D4S, but I'll hop over into develop here and see if I even applied any noise reduction. Sometimes if I do see a lot of noise, I will do some noise reduction, but generally speaking, I don't do a whole hell of a lot. So yeah, it looks like I pushed it up just a little bit here, but very minimally. It's up to 19 on the noise reduction. I think the default is 0, I want to say. So, I push it up a little bit there, but when I get down into like the 6400 range or lower, sometimes I probably won't do much. I think this is that's going to be a Photoshop file, so I can't check. Let me check the original here. 1 second. There's the raw file. Let's check that. No, same thing, 19. So yeah, I guess I just applied a little bit of noise reduction there, so it's probably just my low noise reduction setting. But sometimes what I'll do if it's really bad is I will apply a heavier noise reduction to the background and then less noise reduction to the bird, bring it in Photoshop, layer them together. So great question. All right, Haley asks, any website or YouTube channel recommendations for keeping up on photography gear news? She says, I don't always notice when new cameras, lenses have been released that I might want to upgrade to. Photography news, gosh, I think there's a couple of them. There's like SLR Lounge, Petapixel is one that has all kinds of, photography news. I'm sure there's probably a few more. Petapixel is the one that I just subscribe to their RSS feed, and every time they post something, I see what it is. But generally speaking, I would say, those are just a couple that jump to my head, but I'm sure there's a bunch. So I don't follow a lot of websites, so sorry I can't answer that one great. All right, Greg asks, let's see. On the Buffleheads you showed, I noticed you were still able to pull some color from the Drake. Would you mind sharing what metering pattern was used and where did you take a reading? Great. That was a great question. Yeah. So, yeah, I was actually completely amazed how much iridescence showed on this Drake. So let's see. Let's go find the original. That's the edited Photoshop file. So here is the original raw file, adjusted. So let's go into Lightroom, into the develop module here, and I'm just going to go ahead and reset it just to show you what it looks like. So I actually was kind of a little overexposed on this. I would normally like to have that white exposed with more detail. I know a lot of people actually like to expose to the right, which this kind of fits that bill, and it did work out for me, but my personal preference and taste is to just actually expose darker. I like to expose for highlights so I don't have them blown out. So this was just a mistake on my part. But anyway, you can see the original. This is completely, unedited on the raw, and it still has a decent amount of that iridescence there. But once I cropped it and adjusted it, I brought the highlights down quite a bit to bring some details back there. I kicked the shadows up, which that's what really brought it out. So you can see from there to there really brought the detail out, and that color just started showing up. And I did end up actually kicking the saturation plus 10 just to really enhance that. And then in Photoshop, that's where I really made this photo sing. So there's the original raw file out of Lightroom, and then in Photoshop, so I enhanced the colors even more, and then I really made that eye pop, and then I made all that background water really kind of a little bit lighter. So I had some good contrast overall there. So great question. Thanks for asking. Oh, you asked about metering. Sorry, I didn't answer that. Let's see. Let's see what metering mode this was on here. I was on manual, everything. I had manual, shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. I do remember that. And so my metering almost always is the overall metering. So Nikon's is, I think, 3D matrix, and I think on Canon it's evaluative. So I almost exclusively use the overall metering on mine. It's just what works for me and what I've used gotten great results with for years, except for this circumstance where I blew the exposure, haha. But I wasn't expecting these ducks to come in as quick as they did. They flew right in and dropped right in front of me, so I just started fumbling and shooting right away and kind of didn't pay attention to my settings. So rookie error, but I got lucky and I was close enough. But great question, Greg. Let's see. Next, Cynthia. Welcome, Cynthia. And Cynthia asks, hi, Ray. When you are scouting locations, what methods do you use to track and organize for planning? I use my memory, actually. So I was just out the other day scouting, and I had used eBird to look for some different locations that had good waterfowl numbers for what I was looking for, which I was looking for more bufflehead locations as well as any other kind of waterfowl I was just looking for, just waterfowl in general. And I was also looking for different northern harrier spots to check out. But I also then just actually hop on Google Maps and use the satellite view and then just start to kind of look for locations that might have, for the harriers, open fields in areas that I've just driven before that I knew about. With the waterfowl, it was basically just kind of spots that I knew waterfowl hang around, and I actually just went and drove around for about 4 hours and just ended up hitting a bunch of different spots. And I found this one spot that was absolutely incredible. There was at least 1,000 different ducks there, all kinds of different dabblers, all kinds of different divers. I mean, just the most amazing duck scene that I've ever seen in my entire life. And it was on private property, and there was no way to access it. It was actually right on the side of a highway. I felt a little nervous pulling over there, but I couldn't help myself. I had to just stop and look with binoculars. But it was absolutely incredible, and unfortunately, it was private property. So I'm going to do some digging around, see if I can find out who actually owns the property, and then ask and see if I can get permission. But, it didn't matter. As amazing as this place would have been to shoot, I'm not going to trespass. So, I think that's key. And I think there's a lot of photographers that might kind of bend those rules and just say, oh, well, nobody's going to see me. I'm just taking pictures. I'm not going to harm anything. But, trespassing is trespassing. And, I'm not going to do that just to get a photo. So, if you can get permission to go to a place like that, then all the better. But, you kind of have to follow the rules and not make a bad name for everyone else. So. Right, let's see. Erica has a gear question. Do I use any filters on my lenses? I do not. Pardon me, I just need a sip of water there. Talking a lot. I don't use any filters on any of my lenses for wildlife photography. I do use polarizing filters and ND filters for things like waterfalls when I photograph them. So just to get the longer exposures, so you can really kind of get, that smooth water kind of stuff. So there you can see it was a 4-second exposure and a 3-second exposure. So those kinds of exposures aren't going to happen without an ND filter. And then if you use a polarizer, you can kind of take the glare off. So that's when I would use filters for nature photography, but for wildlife, I never do. And I actually find in my portrait photography, I've ditched all filters off of all of my lenses. I know a lot of people say they like them for protection, but I personally have never had any issue. I have been shooting weddings and portraits for over 10 years now, and I've never actually scratched a front element on my lenses, and I don't have any filters on them. I always make sure I keep my lens hood on everything. That's my 500, my 300, and all my portrait gear. And that has been great protection and prevented me from ruining some things before. But that is a great question. And I like to shoot a lot of backlight stuff, as you may know. And when I do that, pointing the lens into the sun and having a filter on it is really bad. You get all kinds of weird extra ghosting and flares, and it's even more tough to focus and stuff like that. So something like this, if you had any kind of filter on the lens, on the front of a lens, it might actually cause degradation in quality. That's just my opinion, though. All right, next question. Ray is back with another question asking, when walking through the woods, what is the go-to setting to use until you set up on something in what mode? Awesome question. So let's check this out. Let's see if we can use Lightroom to filter. I don't know if it lets you filter the shooting mode. I don't think it does, unfortunately, which is kind of a bummer because I'd love to see if I was using, aperture priority or shutter priority or manual. So anyway, but I can just tell you, my go-to setting for walking around is aperture priority with auto ISO enabled, and I set my minimum ISO usually to from anywhere between 200 to 400. My maximum ISO on my camera, which is a D4S, is usually around, I think I set it at 16,000 right now. And then the important part, since I'm an aperture priority, is I set a minimum shutter speed, and that really depends on what I'm trying to shoot. So let me go find this cerulean warbler from earlier, because that was one I know I was shooting that way. Here we go. See, aperture priority. So I set the minimum shutter speed to be 1/200th of a second, and then I just let the ISO go wherever it needed to give me a proper setting on this. Because what would happen is this bird would land somewhere here, and then it would land somewhere there, and there you can see it was even darker, and then it would land somewhere even different like that. So the ISO was just bouncing all over the place. Here, look, it shot all the way up to 16,000 ISO. Because this spot was really dark under the canopy. So I didn't have to change a single setting when I shot all these different things. So, all of these were the same set, and different settings, different backgrounds, different lighting, different amount of lighting, and I never had to change a single camera setting. I just let the camera do all the work. I believe, let's check with this one. Yeah, no, it stayed there. I didn't even have to dial in exposure comp on this one. I just let it hit it right on there. And it worked really well. And so again, this is my overall the Nikon's 3D matrix metering and aperture priority, auto ISO. In this case, I was at a minimum shutter speed of 1/200th, which is lower than what I usually do for walking around. Normally when I'm walking around, I will use a shutter speed of like 500th of a second. But I knew it was really dark in this circumstances, and to get my ISO down a little bit, I actually dropped that minimum shutter speed. So but then if I'm shooting something, set up and stationary or consistent lighting or backlight, something like this, then I am in full manual. So I'm not using auto ISO at all, just full manual shutter speed, aperture, and ISO as well. So for those kinds of things, and especially like backlight stuff like this. Oh, actually, even this one I was shooting aperture priority. And now I remember why, because they were flying all around me. I was shooting backlight and front light, depending on when they were spinning. So I was in the water for this one, and these skimmers were flying around me. So, I couldn't keep up with changing the settings as they would fly into different areas. And so I didn't want to have to do that, So, here's one, like they were flying right at me with nice light on the one side, and then they would spin into there, and I needed 800th of a second at ISO 200, whereas here it was down to 250th of a second. This is probably a mistake. I had my shutter speed set too low, my minimum shutter speed. It should have been higher, but you can get cool things like this with like a little bit of motion blur on the wings and sharp beak. So lucky accidents sometimes. But yeah, that's what happened. Aperture priority in that circumstance. All right, great question. So let's see. Next question coming up. Soren from Romania, thanks so much for joining. Do I use back button focus? So the short answer is yes. I actually use it in reverse. So I use my shutter button to initiate autofocus, and my back button cancels autofocus and locks it. So for something like, let's see if I can find a great example. Yeah, for something like this, I focused on the bird using my shutter button, and as soon as it gained focus on that, I was still using my center point. I press the back button, it locks focus, then I recompose for a shot like this and take the shot. So most people that use back button autofocus use it in reverse. So when they actually press that back button, they initiate autofocus, and then when they let go, it stops autofocus, then they can recompose and get the shot. So you get the same exact effect. It just kind of depends on how you want to use those buttons. But yes, I definitely use it, and I recommend it. Oh boy, you guys are giving me lots of questions. I got to answer these quicker. All right. Thank you, though, so much. Connor asks, do I use the exposure compensation button on the camera if I can tell something is clearly over underexposed because of natural lighting, or do I just shoot normal and fix it in post? Yes, I use the exposure compensation button rather often when I'm in the aperture priority modes. Let's see if I can find some good examples. I mean, most of this stuff I think is going to be manual. So let me see if I can stumble upon some aperture priority stuff. But in any case, the answer is yes. If I know that my camera meter is going to under or overexpose something, here you go. I went negative a stop on this one. So I knew with that dark background, the camera would probably likely overexpose the birds because they were in the sun, the background was not. So I dialed in negative exposure compensation. When shooting something against lighter backgrounds or really dark backgrounds like this, there's another great example. Dark background, I told the camera to shoot negative a stop. So that's going to be the way I go more often than not. Here you go. I went plus a third just to give it a little bit lighter. So yeah, great question. And yeah, I definitely use that all the time. All right, let's see. Espen asks, what method do I use to get close to different types of wildlife? I use a hide and camouflage, yes. I don't use bait. I've never baited anything, but I guess the closest thing I can say to that I'm baiting something is I've just started using decoys for ducks, and that's how I got these guys in really close. So I brought them in by using decoys, but I never baited anything. And I will use bird call playback sparingly to get birds to come into the area. So I do that as well. All right. I'm guessing this is Scott, who asks, is it true that me and Scott didn't break up? It is very true, yes. We just have busy schedules right now. So let's see. Next question. I look at your portfolio often and notice how clean your images are. Not much noise. Is this a combination of fast lens, lower ISO, and a body that can handle the higher ISO? You answered your own question. Yes, it is all those things. This camera body, the Nikon D4S, handles noise incredibly, and generally keeping my ISO down helps, but I don't mind going higher. So here's ISO 6400, and if I zoom in here just a little bit for you, you can see there is some texture, there's some noise there, but it ain't bad. So yeah, the body definitely makes a big difference. Is it true that Scott shoots JPEG? I think he doesn't even know what RAW is, so I believe that is definitely the case, yeah. So thank you. Great question. Could you do more of those real-time edit videos in the future? Really love your stuff. Yes, I certainly will do more of those. Thanks for the feedback. Where's the best place to shoot a mandarin duck, Ray asks. So one of those has oddly shown up in Central Park in New York, and everybody in the entire Northeast was going crazy over that. So that was really something funny, and I did not chase it because it seemed to me like it was a captive duck that had gotten out. So yeah, I don't know where to actually shoot them naturally. I think out west in the U.S., and then I don't even know outside of this country where you would go. This is an interesting question that I've never heard or thought of. Do cell towers affect wildlife? That's well beyond my knowledge, so actually you would have to ask someone else with more information in that regard. I have no idea how to answer that. All right, and now a nice generic question. So keep the questions coming, guys. I'm actually getting near the end here of the question, so I guess I didn't have as many as I thought. What got me into wildlife photography? Elijah asks that. So what got me into it? I actually grew up hunting and fishing with my father, so I was always in, outdoors in nature. And as I got older, we had less and less time for that, and I kind of just slowly faded out of doing that. And when that happened, my dad actually started hunting and fishing less, and he started just taking photos of birds in his backyard with, I think he got like a Canon Film Rebel with a kit 70 to 300 millimeter lens, and he he just started photographing birds in his backyard, and then eventually he got a digital camera, and then he started traveling and trying to find other places to go photograph things, and then I just kind of started picking up on that with him and joining in. So basically my dad kind of got me into it, and just generally being a lover of nature and outdoors has definitely kind of got me into it. But I started out, a lot of my early wildlife photography, let's find some early crap here. Emphasis on crap because there's going to be a lot of junk in here, so bear with me. Here was like a trip to Alaska. But yeah, so something like this, let's see, back in 2008. I think I actually started photographing wildlife in 2006. But, you can see I couldn't even take a good picture of a Canada goose there. Although the wing flap is not too bad, I will say that. But, f5.6, standing up, looking down at it, not the best. And then, so these were actually all photos that I shared. So, horrible light, a cool lineup of these Sanderlings, but not a great perspective, not a great background. I think the background's almost more in focus than the birds. And I started getting more and more into birds just because they're so available. You can find them everywhere. From anywhere from your backyard to traveling to very remote areas, you can find them. And here's another great example of I found some decent light here, but horrible with this branch coming out of the background, and it's not very in focus. And 25/100th of a second, pushing the ISO up to 500 with that much light is completely unnecessary. So silly things like that I was doing back in the day. And I started shooting with this, isn't this lovely, 70 to 200 millimeter. So that was my wildlife lens when I started. And I think this camera body was a D200, I want to say. Yeah, I don't even think it has. Oh no, this was when I had a D300. So, but yeah, birds are everywhere. They're very challenging. I absolutely love to chase them. And, that's kind of what just got me into wildlife photography. All right, next question. Ray asks, when do you switch over to manual from aperture priority? I switch over to manual in challenging lighting conditions. So, a lot of shooting backlit, weird stuff like this. Ray, you were actually with me when we took these, so this stuff was full manual because I had no idea what the meter was going to do with this, and I actually wanted to underexpose the bird and get that exposure on the sun. Settings like this where I have a really light bird against a dark background, it's going to be really hard for the camera meter to get that properly, so going full manual there definitely was the key to getting those exposures. So basically when I'm in consistent lighting conditions and it's not changing that much, I will use full manual just so I have full control over it. So even in some flat light scenarios like this, I was full manual because the light was consistent, and I could just dial it in and be consistent and not have to worry about what I'm pointing at as far as the background or anything like that. So my automatic settings are more for when I'm walking around and have no idea what I'm going to photograph. All right, moving right along. Where do I get my prints made, and what paper do I favor? I almost never print anything, but when I do, I don't have a particular paper preference. I have some prints hanging in my house that are just standard luster surface, like a semi-gloss surface, and I do have some metallic prints, so they are very, very glossy. Those are kind of neat, but I actually have a preference of a mount, which is a standout mount, so it's mounted on a thick black board, and it's kind of just ready to hang on the wall without needing a frame or anything like that. I think it's just kind of a clean, modern look, and you don't have to worry about the expense or the hassle of framing. So I do like those kind of prints, but I generally don't print that much myself. So thank you for asking, M. Shepa6. All right, let's see. Next question. Bruce asks, how much difference between a D3S and D4S as far as metering ability and noise handling? Metering seems exactly the same to me. I didn't notice a difference at all between those. And noise handling, I would say I get maybe about a stop better on the D4S, roughly, ballpark, something like that. So I do like it. The overall performance of it is just a little bit nicer, having a little bit more resolution. The 12 megapixel D3S was a little tough, but the 16 on the D4S is nice. I think the sweet spot for me would be like an 18 or maybe 20 megapixel, but anything over that for the way I shoot and what I like to do is resolution overkill for me. So I have really had little to no interest in any of these really high resolution camera bodies. And again, that's just for me. So I don't really tend to crop things a lot, and I'd much rather be able to shoot really quality low light stuff than be able to have the resolution to crop a ton. So that's just, for me, is what works. But for other people it can be very different. How do I get the right exposure in manual mode? Ani asks me that. Just using the camera meter internally. So the internal camera meter, I can see it when I'm shooting, and I usually will just for something like this, I'll probably dial it in. The meter will tell me it's like 2 to 3 stops underexposed, but I know the meter is wrong and I'm right. So, using that meter can get me in the ballpark there. But plenty of times I will take an exposure and just look on the back of the camera. So for something like this, I was using the metering, and I probably underexposed it a little bit based on the meter, but I knew that that's what I wanted to maintain the highlight detail in the feathers and stuff like that. So when shooting backlight, it's basically just been experience, shooting a ton and getting out there a lot and kind of figuring out and understanding how your camera works and those sort of things definitely help. I'm a wedding photographer and portrait photographer by trade, so even when I'm not out photographing wildlife and I'm at work, I'm still taking pictures. So I've just gotten really good with my camera and knowing what it's going to do and how the meter works. So I think that's kind of a key to being able to get really good exposures. And believe you me, I do not nail exposures all the time. So if I show you the raw file on this one, let's take a look. It's probably, there you go, it's vastly different than what the processed version of this one looks like. So I screw up exposures kind of often. Let's see what something like this looks like. Let's check out the raw file. There you go. I mean, yeah, good exposure, but very different looking photo than what you see in the final here. I'm trying to think of something that I know I like completely screwed the exposure on, but this one probably looks pretty wild in the original. Yeah, there you go. It's just kind of dark and flat and boring, but with some good processing, good post-processing, it can be something pretty interesting. So great question. All right, next question. Ray again, where did you learn to tell such awesome stories about your photos, and why did you decide to do that? I don't know where I learned it. I have no idea, but I decided to do it. Over the years, when I was captioning, I would occasionally do a longer caption, and I would get really good feedback from the viewers that they enjoyed hearing more story. So I just kept going with that, and I just keep telling more and more. So I generally think when I caption a photo, I try to think about either, A, was the story interesting of me capturing this photo? And if it was, I'll tell that story. And if not, I'll usually just tell a little bit more technically about how I was trying to approach it and what I was thinking when I tried to photograph it, so people can kind of learn something. Let's see. Where did you find your used lens, and where might be a trustworthy site to find used equipment? Yes, so that's a great one. I used, let's see, I'll pull up the website for you. I used fredmiranda.com. They have, oh wait, I was going to say, I thought they still existed. Fredmiranda.com, although it looks like it might be down. I don't know about that. It used to exist. I haven't been on it in a while. Fred Miranda. Let's try a Google search of it here. I don't know if something changed. Well, either their website's down or something's going on with it. Anyway, I used to use that website to buy used and sell and buy used gear, but that site seems to be down. So check it out tomorrow or the next day, see if it comes back. And if not, I don't know outside of that. I would say you go to in the U.S. There is. What's the big company? B&H Photo has a used department, so that's probably reliable, but you're going to spend a lot more. But basically, I would say, you could always try your eBay and Craigslist, but just make sure you do your due diligence and research the seller, and if you can, see it in person or get a referral. But that's why Fred Miranda used to be great, because it was a group of forums with a lot of users that kind of police themselves. So, I bought and sold stuff from there. So good question. Let's see. Susan asks, not sure how to ask this quickly. On a VR lens, is it the shutter release button that activates the VR? And if you use back button focus and then recompose, is the VR still active? I believe it is the autofocus activation that initiates the vibration reduction. So VR on Nikon, it's the IS on Canon, image stabilization. And it should be the focus button, just initiating that. Whether you're using the back button or the shutter button, I don't think it matters. And it should. So that's a good point, though. If you're using back button autofocus and then recompose, so if you let off of it, is it still active? No, I guess you'd have to half hold the shutter button to keep your VR active at that point. So yeah, I guess that's kind of weird. I never thought about it that way. So for me, I always have my hand on the shutter button to initiate autofocus and keep that VR going. So I'm just used to it. So yeah, interesting question, but yeah, something I never thought of just because of the way I use it. But I think maybe just half holding that shutter button should do the trick for you to keep it active if you need to. Soren asks, how do you fix lens calibration if you have a front or back focus? The key is at what distance do you take the test shots if you have a 500 millimeter lens? I've only ever calibrated my portrait lenses, so my 24, 35, 50, and 85 millimeter f1.4 lenses. I have them all calibrated, and I do them all at different distances and just find the setting that's kind of the most consistent. But luckily for me, I never had to do my 500 millimeter. So as for what distance, I would say try different distances, or maybe figure out the average distance of things you shoot most often and calibrate there. That's my best guess. Sorry, I can't be more helpful with that one. All right, let's see. Mike McDonald asks, what picture or, oops, sorry, it just scrolled on me. He asks, what picture or animal you took a picture of is your most favorite, or why are you most proud of what you captured and why? Ooh, tough question. Lately, the things that have been made me the most proud are the things I've had to work the hardest for. So photographing these loons was definitely a bit of a project. It was kind of a multi-year search and planning process to kind of find the spot where I wanted to go and get them. So when my friend Scott and I, who shoots JPEG all the time, when we found these, we went up to New Hampshire together and found and photographed these loons together. It was quite the amazing experience. And then Scott actually he was responsible for getting us on the top of a mountain to photograph these blackpoll warblers on the same trip. But so that was pretty special just because of the amount of time and effort and planning and work that went into it. Shoots like this where I can make these really unique and different photos of these birds in a place that not many people were going to. So my friend Ray, who is actually on the comments today, he was with me for this outing, but we actually kayaked out to some islands in the back bays of southern New Jersey, and it was just us out there in the middle of these bays on this little kind of island of sand that was exposed at lower tides. And we were there as the sun was setting, and we had our floating blinds, and we were paddling and running and literally swimming around with our lenses to try and get these photos. So when you're able to make really unique photos like that, those are the ones I'm most proud of. But they don't necessarily do the best because it's kind of hard to tell how much work went into creating these photos versus something else. So, for example, this photo on the left here of the semi-palmated plover, I didn't work hard at all for this. I was running a workshop. I just had my camera with me just to help show the students some different settings and stuff like that. I had my straight 300 millimeter lens on me. I didn't even have a teleconverter, and I was just working with them mostly. And then this bird walked up in this beautiful light, and I grabbed the shot, and boom, I had it. So I worked so much harder, and I'm so much more proud of this photo. But this photo is equally as beautiful, or some might say even more. So. It more often than not, the photos that I worked hard for that may not have as much crowd appeal actually mean more to me than some other people, especially the viewers. Espen asks, do I monetize my wildlife photos? So yes, I sell some on microstock websites. I only make maybe like $100 a month on that, so not a ton. I also do some licensing. Recently, I got a contract to photograph some birds at bird feeders. So, trying to do that creatively has been interesting. So I'll just show you some of those real quick. It's for a company called Global Harvest Foods. And, it's bird feeders, but, I went out in a light snow that happened recently, and I set up some really interesting sets with this log, and I put the vines there and hung the feeders, and I set up this branch and all this stuff. So I made some what I think are really pretty photos. I mean, I'm never going to share these outside of this because they have bird feeders in them, but it was a fun project, and I made a nice chunk of change with it. So things like that. And the main thing I do to make money with wildlife photography is teaching. So I offer and share a lot of information, and I offer workshops for people. So that's where I make the bulk of my money, is taking people out to photograph birds. And if you are in New Jersey or the New Jersey area and you're interested, it's rayhennessy.com, and then just go to the workshop section. I have group workshops which are coming up. I'm going to have some really fun warbler tours next year. If anybody's interested, sign up now because 2 of them are already sold out. And then I also take out people one-on-one, and I have dozens of species available to take people out to photograph different species for workshops one-on-one. So I do a lot of that as well. So great question. Let me just take a sip of water here. All right, let's see. Somebody said they use Moab paper by Legion. Those are some of their favorite papers for printing that have some texture to them. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's great for anybody that likes to print on their own. I personally hate printing on my own. I worked for other studios that did printing, and I just, for whatever reason, it didn't connect with me. I hated it. So let's see. We're getting near the end here. Got about another 15 minutes, so get your questions in now. I'll try to answer quickly. Soren asks, do I always shoot as wide open as possible for wildlife? Yes, I do. I pretty much always shoot everything at f4 on my lens. You know, you're going to see that over and over again. That's just my style. That's how I like to shoot. Wide open, lots of shallow depth of field. Ray asks, what out of reach shots are on my bucket list? You know what? I really don't have any currently going right now. I just generally try to think of the most creative thing I can do with the local stuff that I can find. I don't have a lot of money or time to travel, so I will be spending a little bit of time in Florida and probably running some workshops down there over the winter, so that's going to be fun, and I'll get to shoot some different stuff down there. But generally speaking, I'm always kind of hanging local, and even when I'm staying there, I'm not going to be traveling all over Florida. So for me, it's about trying to get as creative as possible with the things that are within reach for me, not thinking about where to go and how to go on these incredible trips. I would love to, but I just can't afford it. M. Shepa6 again asks, how do you add such great colors to your images and posts, such as in your hooded and wood duck images with the golds and reds? I didn't add them in there. Let's go to the wood duck ones. I know exactly what you're talking about. Those were the actual backgrounds. So like this. Let me show you. There's the raw file straight out of camera, so it's just weak. It just needed some contrast adjustments and some white balance adjustments. You can see there's a lot of blue tones in the duck. It's just way too cool. The camera tried to dial out a lot of that red. So when I actually just dial the white balance back in, let's see, I'll find the raw file in Lightroom here. When I dialed the white balance back in properly, it was able to get into that area of color. And then I did definitely punch it up in, let's see, is that the one? Yeah, there we go. So raw file in Lightroom, Photoshop processed file. So I definitely punched it up some more there and cleaned it up. But, you know, when the white balance started out like that, it just doesn't look that amazing. And then shifting it warmer gets you kind of in that tone, you know, in that area. And then just punching it up in Photoshop definitely helps make that really stand out. And then it was the same thing with this girl, you know, the female there, the hen, and then the hooded mergansers was the same thing. So just finding these colorful backgrounds really helped. Next question. Neil asks, when you bring your images into Lightroom, do you instantly keyword caption or do that at a later time? Also, do you keep your images separated by species or date, time, location? Great question. This is kind of something I'm nerdy and into. So here's how I work. When I import a job, it automatically gets added into this location collection. So I then drop it on a map. So I actually have my entire wildlife catalog mapped out here. I'll show you. You guys have been great with these questions, by the way. Thanks so much. While I'm waiting for this to load, I'll just answer some other questions here. Patricia asked, do I prefer shooting at sunrise or sunset? I personally prefer sunrise all the time. So I like getting up early and just less people. I find birds are more active in the morning, so that's what I like to do, and that's when I go out. I prefer to go in the morning versus the evening. Yeah, Greg says Fred Miranda is up, and he has used them to buy and sell equipment as well. Yeah, I'm not sure what was going on with my computer there, but yeah, so fredmiranda.com and check out their buy and used forum. So here we go. This is my area, and you can see all these photos. So obviously I shoot a lot in New Jersey, some in PA, some in Maryland. These were trips. These are actually accurate. I took some pelagic trips out into the ocean, like 40 miles out. So you can see I shoot all over kind of the Northeast here a lot. And even a little bit up into there. And then when you get down into Florida, you'll start to see the same thing again down there when I zoom in there. So I actually geotag all of my photos and map them on a location so I can kind of see where they were all taken, which is kind of a fun way to do that. So from there, they go into the initial culling section, or collection, I should say. So I go through there, weed out all the junk, out of focus, everything bad about it gets tossed. Then it goes into here where I actually could go through and I'll do a final cull. So this stuff is sitting in there right now for me to work through. So I'm going through these right now and deciding exactly what I want to keep and what I want to delete. So that's kind of, I have like 200 some photos in there to go through now. From there, whatever is left goes into the color correct collection. So all these I have to color correct. Then from there, they go into the rating after they're color corrected. So these all have to be rated. So I just go through and give them a 1 to 5 star rating based on quality and how I like them. And then from there, they go into keywording. So you can see I've been slacking on my keywording. I got like 3,600 photos in to be keyworded. So I'm definitely way behind on that. And hopefully I'll catch up this winter. And then as far as captioning them, I don't actually caption them until I actually choose the specific photo to share. And you'll see I have the shared collection here and a 2 shared collection. So these are all photos that are optional and potentials for me to share. So they're all decent quality shots. So I have like 1,800 photos sitting in there right now. And then every day I want to share a photo, I'll hop in here, find something I want to share, edit it up, and then I share it. So that's how that works. So great question. Greg says, oh yeah, he already said that. Fred Miranda is up. I already answered the sunrise sunset question. I definitely like the morning. Marcin asked, did you try the D850 and my experience with the D5? I rented a D5, or actually I got a loaner D5 while I had my D4S being repaired. And the D5 is really nice. It's just not worth the money upgrade for me. There's just not enough benefits from the D4S to the D5 for me to justify spending any money on it. Again, if money was no object, I would certainly have a D5. It's better, but it's just not worth it for me. And I have not shot a D850 yet, no. But everything I've seen from it and my experience with the D800 before, when I tried that, again, it's the same thing. The high ISO, the low light capability is definitely not as good, and overall performance is not as good, in my opinion. I'm sure you'll find somebody that disagrees with that. But, I don't think they're quite as up to the performance level as the D3, D4, D5 series. And they definitely, in my opinion, are not up to the low light capability of those cameras as well. And I prefer to shoot in low light and have cleaner high ISO images versus the ultra high resolution. I don't print much. Most of my stuff gets shared online, and even when I do print, I have 20 by 30 prints hanging on the wall behind me from a 12 megapixel camera that look amazing. So I don't see any need for a 40 and 50 megapixel camera for my use. So that answers that. And do I have any tips for low light shooting? Yes, shoot slower shutter speeds than you think you actually need. So let's do that. Let's take a look here. This will be a great ending question. So let's get out of these obviously low for silly reasons shots. There's where I was trying to intentionally blur stuff. 60th of a second right there. Okay. Here's another 60th of a second, nice and sharp. All right, so that's definitely slow. Let's get down into the 100th of a second images. All right, so the head is sharp, got some interesting motion blur there. Again, 100th of a second. So all these right here, 100th of a second, 100th of a second. All of these were taken at 100th of a second to keep my ISO down. And you can still see, even at 100th of a second, I was at ISO 1250. So that means if I had, doubled that, I'd be up into what, like 3200 range ISO. If I went up to 300, 320th of a second, I'd be up into like 4000, 5000 range of ISO. So I kept my ISO down by shooting slower shutter speeds, 125th of a second. Here we go. So 1100 ISO, 900 ISO, 640 ISO, because I kept these lower shutter speeds. Even that one, 2000 ISO, it's plenty sharp there. Nice and sharp, got good detail. I wouldn't say it's tack sharp, but I mean, this will get the job done. And it allowed me to keep a cleaner looking image there. Here we go, another whole set, 160th of a second. So this one is like tack sharp. It's not going to get much sharper than that, in my opinion. And it allowed me to keep my ISO down at 1,000 ISO. So, yeah, I think so many photographers think they need way more shutter speed than they actually do. Here's, I have 86 photos right here that were all at 200th of a second. Warblers bouncing all around. Everybody thinks they're crazy and they're fast and they're moving all over the place, right? So here you go, check it out. Nice and sharp. You can even see the tongue there, the feather detail around the head, the wing bars, everything is there. Plenty of texture. It's a tack sharp image at 200th of a second. And even at 200th of a second, I was at ISO 3600. So that's how low light this scenario was. And I'll show you the raw file here. So there's the original raw file exposure. So pretty right on with the exposure. I definitely darkened it and the background in post-processing there to really make that bird pop and give it a little bit more dark, swampy feel to it. But 200th of a second for all of these photos. And here you go. This one's like really close. So you can actually see like all the detail on the water drops, feather detail there. You can see like the ridges around the eye ring on this at 200th of a second. And even at that rate, 5600 ISO. So that's my tip for you with low light. Definitely shoot slower shutter speeds than you think you can get away with. The stabilization in these lenses, these modern lenses, is great nowadays. So it really allows you to shoot much slower shutter speeds and still get some really sharp photos. And it allows you to keep your ISO down and also push the ISO a little bit. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of grain in the background. Noise is not the worst thing ever, in my opinion, as long as it doesn't detract from the photo. I don't mind a little texture in that background there. So that's a great. Oh, and no, Soren, he asks again, are these handheld slower shutter speeds? Not at all. So this, for a photo like this, I was resting my camera on the edge of my kayak, so it was kind of handheld, but I had some support there. For these photos, all these warblers, I was on a monopod. I was sitting in the swamp water. My monopod was in like 3 feet of water, but I was supported on a monopod. So I'm either on a monopod or I use a ground pod, which is basically like a frisbee, to support the lens really low to the ground. So no, I definitely use a support system for all these slower shutter speeds and higher shutter speeds for that matter. But I never use a tripod because I just don't like it. It doesn't allow me to move around the way I want. So that's it, guys. That's about an hour, and I'm getting pretty tired of talking. Thank you all so much for joining in. This was a lot of fun, and I definitely think I'll do one of these again, and hopefully maybe me and Scott can do one together down the road like this, because I think having you guys just ask all these random questions was a lot of fun, and it was a great way to really have the topics go kind of all over the place. So don't forget, all you guys, to join in with Scott this Wednesday, December 19th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Scott's going to be talking about predictive behavior for bird photography, so that should be a really fun talk. And I'm not 100% positive, but I think he's going to have a guest join him on that one, so you may get to check that out. But again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. I hope you all enjoyed and learned something, and have a great rest of your Sunday. And if you're not where it's raining, I hope you get out and shoot. Take it easy. Bye-bye.